Okay, so the next part of chapter 5, and I apologize for the length, but necessary for me to go through and cover this portion. It won't take as long as the last, I assure you. But the next part of chapter 5 deals with the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy basically is the infrastructure that is put in place to run the country. It's the way that the federal government has created a framework or a hierarchical structure to address the needs of the 330 million of us. Okay, and so in that there are various uh, competing interests, but basically the framework is set up to make sure that we, as a country, both domestically and globally, are able to operate and address the needs of, and again, I would even argue further than beyond the 330 million of us, also that those parts of the world that we also have vested interest in. And so this is the institutional framework by which we do this or accomplish this task. Certainly, the bureaucracy has changed over the last 200 plus years. It used to be a day when we used to call it was a patronage system, which basically meant that the president or whoever was in charge would basically hook up their friends. So whoever helped get them elected or contributed to their money to them, or people who were loyal to their political party, would be the people who he would hook up to basically run the various organizations inside of the bureaucracy. Um, then it also, in conjunction with that, it was also what we call the spoils system, meaning that whoever served the bureaucracy would serve the interests of the president. So whatever the policies that the president wanted to institute would be served by the bureaucracy. And in fact, I would argue, though this had supposedly gone by the wayside with some of the civil service reforms in the late 1800s and even going into the 20th century, that in fact we see this again in today's world playing out more and more, where the current president, is using the bureaucracy in ways to support his own personal agenda. Like from the issue of climate change, for example. Doesn't matter what you think about it, whether you agree or don't agree with it, whatever you know about it, but the president just gets to decide who gets to sit on the EPA or on top of various organizations, even within his own cabinet, uh, based on his whim. And one of the issues that I have with this, one of the most dangerous for any president, whether it's Trump or anyone else, the dangerous part of this is that they don't have to have any qualifications. If I were president of the United States and you were my homie and I just happened to like you as a person and I wanted to make you Secretary of Labor or Secretary of Interior or Agriculture or Treasury or whatever, I could just put you there with no check and balance, which is just nuts to me that there aren't any prior, basic qualifications or oversight group of people who have to approve who the president puts in these positions. To me, that's just nuts to me, but that's where we find ourselves today. But the important part about you knowing that is that we can change these things constitutionally by amendment if we think that they're crazy. And some of these things I would argue are antiquated and crazy, and that's one of them, in my opinion. Um, so the idea was, and as you see on the PowerPoint here, that the first reform of the civil service came in the 1880s, and basically it was trying to make sure that those who worked in the federal bureaucracy were serving the public good, meaning for all of us, rather than the leaders themselves. And so this is where we started to have the first change, and then several other changes came in the late to mid 20th century, and even to the later 20th century, we had several civil service reforms that tried to fortify and protect against the possibility of having powerful influences take over and drive the federal bureaucracy and those organizations under its umbrella into a certain direction that would not be good for the American public. Um, the notion of neutral competence just meant that basically the individuals in those positions were competent in their roles and had the expertise and were promoted on the basis of merit. This has not happened yet, but it is certainly part of the goal of the organization, is to make sure that the people who are there are competent to be in those positions. Okay. Here's a good, this chart shows you basically the organization of the federal government. On the left, you see over here that the legislative branch, which is Congress, has their own sort of infrastructure. The executive branch has a much bigger infrastructure. That's where most of the individuals are housed. And the judicial branch also has its infrastructure within the federal bureaucracy. But the largest infrastructure is under the executive branch, starting with the executive office of the president, and then below there, the various cabinet positions. They're called departments, and the people who head the departments of these various agencies are called secretaries. They're not secretaries in the vein that we think of secretaries, but they are the ones who have oversight over the various areas of the country, based on the various interests. So you can see here: agriculture, commerce, defense, education, energy, health, human services, etc. All these departments their focus is to address the needs of all of us. So it covers every aspect of what we as human beings need or have to address in society. I love when the planes go by. And then below the cabinet level positions is a vast organization of agencies that are either independent or regulatory or various government corporations. And it's a wide ranging, and there are thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that work in this framework. So you can see in here, if you look across here, the CIA is in here, FDIC, the Federal Communications Commission, NASA's in here. There's all kinds of organizations that make part of this, that are part of the federal bureaucracy. And so it is a very, very extensive framework that, again, is charged with addressing the needs of all the people in our country. So again, this was a way the federal bureaucracy is put in place to help the president do his job. So the idea was to make sure that he had the people who had their fingers on the pulse of all the different aspects of our country and the issues so that they could address the needs across the country. So if you look under the executive branch, of course, it's not just about the president. He has an executive office, an administrative office, if you would, including his chief of staff, the White House office, which includes the communications office, which has the press secretaries there, the Council of Domestic Policy, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a vast organization, even under each branch of government. Of course, as I've already iterated, that the bureaucracy is organized under the departments and then independent agencies and then the various regulatory agencies and boards and commissions and government corporations. Those are all part of the federal system. So the idea within this is that the bureaucracy has to deal with all types of entities and individuals. So sometimes they have to deal with what we call clientele groups, which are basically our citizen groups that are focused on particular issues, and they have to respond to those needs. They have to respond to regulatory issues to make sure that people are safe on their jobs. They have to make sure that that the laws that are passed are enforced properly. That's why they have rulemaking authority. They also have bureaucratic discretion to make sure that the legislative power that are delegated by Congress come under review. And then they also have department obligations as well, because again, they're subdivisions of the federal government, and basically each one of these departments is represented in the president's cabinet. So this is how we keep the wheels moving forward. And the beauty of it is that even if something happened to the president, and all of a sudden, we had to have somebody new come in. The bureaucracy is structured in such a way that we are fairly well protected from any type of craziness or, any real craziness, because the structure is set up to protect us from that. Now, some of the things that happen internally, like in any bureaucracy or administration, there's stuff, right? There's always stuff inside. Many of you have jobs, you know what it's like inside your own bureaucratic cultures, whether you work at McDonald's or whether you work in a big agency, right? Like the IID or Border Patrol or something. There's bureaucratic culture. There's career issue. There's the various people. There's all kinds of minutia going on. Stuff There's agency, interagency tension, and who said, he said, she said. What kind of boss do you have? Is somebody who is micromanaging versus those that aren't? So there's a lot to navigate in terms of understanding the bureaucracy and how it operates and can context with the real world. They're very, very similar. Um, you also have inside of this also what we call the iron triangle, and this is basically the relationship between the various clientele groups, the various people in Congress, and then the bureaucratic agencies themselves, and how they sort of cooperate through this triangle to try and create uh, policies that are going to benefit, hopefully, the public, hopefully not themselves, but that can be subject to change. Um, or subject to question, I should say. And then there's also this what we call issues network, and this is basically deals with the relationships that drive policy. How policy is actually implemented, and what kind of pressure is brought to bear to push the policy agenda of the administration forward. And this is where we have to do a better job ourselves in making sure, or asking a bigger question. What's in it for us and what's in it for them, right? And so this is the next phase in our evolution and growth, is to become more aware of the issues that directly affect us. And not just listening to the verbiage of or the rhetoric of an individual like the president or anyone else, but really looking at ourselves and asking those questions. Does this make sense to us? Okay. I will see you in chapter 6. All right. Have a good one, guys.